Have you ever felt like you spent your whole life trying to be noticed by someone who never truly saw you? This kind of emotional wound is more common than people think, but it's rarely talked about. Unlike mothers, fathers often fail in silence. He may have been physically present, but his attention, his gaze, never really reached you. Growing up without that kind of presence means you're always trying to prove your value. Through success, through toughness, through silence. You learn to survive, but deep inside, you're still waiting for someone to finally see you. Carl Jung was one of the first to explain that a father's absence is more than a personal issue. It affects something much deeper. In the psyche, the father represents authority, motivation, and validation. When that figure fails, whether through absence, neglect, emotional distance, or extreme pressure, something breaks inside a child. What's missing isn't just love, it's the foundation of self-worth. Today, I want to help you recognize this hidden emotional wound and offer a simple yet powerful path to begin healing it. And at the end of this video, I'll share a challenge with you. It's small, but it might help you finally let go of a presence that was never really there. From the very beginning, a child's mind builds inner images to understand life. Jung called these archetypes, basic patterns that shape how we feel and relate to the world even before we can speak. Among the most important is the archetype of the father. Symbolically, the father is more than just a man. He represents the force that helps a child step out of emotional dependence and begin becoming their true self. This energy helps a child separate, face the world with courage, and move forward with purpose. Where the mother is linked with love, care, and emotional connection, the father stands for strength, direction, and protection. The mother nurtures the heart. The father prepares the soul for life, and that's why the father wound is so quiet, yet so damaging. A mother's absence often feels like emotional emptiness. But a father's absence shows up as a broken inner structure, a lack of direction, and the missing sense of worth that quietly eats away at you. If you're also curious about how the mother wound affects your life, we've created a full video on it. It's one of the most eye-opening we've ever done. People write to us all the time saying it helped them feel truly seen. If that sounds familiar, the link is in the description. But let's return to the father. When the archetype of the father appears in a healthy way through a real father figure, it creates a sense of steady and caring authority. It's the dad who leads without dominating, corrects without making you feel small, and challenges you without leaving you behind. He sets limits, teaches values, and most importantly, he sees you. He looks you in the eyes and communicates, even without words. You matter, you belong. But when the father archetype fails, when he's passive, angry, distant, or placed on an unreachable pedestal, it leaves a deep crack in the psyche. The child doesn't get the confidence to face life. Instead, they grow up unsure of themselves, stuck in an endless wait for a recognition that never comes. No amount of gifts, presence, or authority can fix that absence. What's missing is emotional connection. And when that's not there, the father archetype gets twisted. What should be a steady guide becomes something that causes fear and paralysis. Jung said every person must eventually separate from the image of their father to become whole. But when the father was never emotionally present to begin with, what breaks instead is the ability to trust. So instead of seeking freedom, we chase belonging. A belonging that was never offered becomes something we search for in everything we do. This search starts in childhood and doesn't fade. It changes form, changes faces, but it never disappears. It stays in the background, like a quiet engine running your life. Most people don't notice it, but that deep fatigue you feel, that constant need to prove yourself, the inability to fully Relax. It often traces back to the absence of a father who never validated your worth. The child who wasn't seen grows into the adult who strives for perfection, who seeks recognition through status, performance, and productivity, who turns life into a constant struggle to earn a place. But no matter how much is achieved, it never feels enough, as if there's always a debt that can't be repaid. Jung taught us the father wound doesn't just disappear with time, it becomes part of your ego structure. It becomes the lens through which you see yourself and the world. The adult shaped by that absence often lives in constant tension, feeling like love must be earned again and again. One wrong move, and that invisible disapproving gaze might return. This is the root of self-sabotage, not a flaw in your character, but a reflection of pain. Deep down, a part of you still believes you don't deserve love, that you should feel guilty for receiving attention or success, because those moments, being seen, being praised, bring back the same discomfort once tied to a father's harsh, critical, or absent gaze. Many people carry this discomfort as if it's their personality. They say things like, "I'm just anxious," or "I hate being in the spotlight," or "I don't trust people." But these aren't personality traits. They're emotional memories disguised as identity. They're survival strategies built to cope with pain that's still alive. The pain of not having a mirror to reflect who you really are. Without a father offering external validation, the child tries to create it on their own. But without a role model, that inner structure is often left unfinished. So you get an adult who looks fine on the outside, but inside, they're drained. They carry the weight of the world, but feel it could all fall apart at any moment. That feeling of insecurity isn't weakness, it's survival. It's emotional wisdom that learned early on that love was unpredictable and worth had to be earned. But what once kept you safe is now holding you back, and realizing that is the first step toward breaking free. Not all wounds look the same. Some are loud and clear, others live in silence and confusion, but both leave deep marks. The father wound shows up in two powerful ways. One is the obvious kind, the father who was aggressive, scary, or cruel, who used criticism, shame, or neglect. This kind leaves strong memories, words that echo, silences that hurt. The child knows something was wrong, even if no one ever said it. Then there's the quieter wound, just as painful but harder to name. This is the father who was physically there, played his role, but was emotionally cold. He provided but didn't connect, set rules but didn't show warmth. He existed, but his heart was somewhere else. And in this kind of environment, children learn not to expect, not to ask, not to feel. They accept the minimum and believe it's all they'll ever get. That subtle absence creates confusion. The child doesn't understand why they feel so disconnected, because on the surface, nothing looks wrong, and with no visible wound, they start doubting their own pain. They grow up thinking their need for connection makes them selfish. That longing for more is a weakness, so they build an identity that hides the wound instead of healing it. But whether loud or quiet, both forms of the father wound lead to the same place, a broken sense of self, a personality shaped around emptiness and unmet needs. A constant urge to adapt in order to feel accepted. Jung reminded us, children with absent or hurtful fathers don't blame the father, they blame themselves. They silently conclude, if he didn't see me, maybe I'm not worth seeing. And the belief grows into insecurity, silence, and fear of being truly known, because the father wound doesn't just whisper, "I wasn't loved." It screams, "I was never recognized, and I've learned how to live without it." But living unseen is exhausting. Eventually, the mind can't keep pretending, and when you can't name the pain, your mind finds a way to survive. One common way is to deny the need completely. The child learns never to ask. Love gets you nowhere. Showing your feelings doesn't change anything. Seeking attention only leads to disappointment. So, over time, they stop trying, not with others, but with themselves. They stop expecting, they stop expressing, they stop needing. They develop a kind of independence that looks like strength on the outside. But inside, it's actually self-abandonment. That child grows into an adult who never asks for help, handles everything alone, and doesn't allow themselves to break down. They've learned how to survive, but not how to receive. Self-reliance turns into armor. Busyness becomes a place to hide. Emotional numbness becomes a shield against the hurt of once being ignored. Jung once said, "The ego forms through adaptation." When your surroundings demand you suppress your truth, the ego keeps you safe by cutting off essential parts of yourself. Emotions retreat, the body tightens, spontaneity disappears, all in the name of survival. But at what cost? Many adults who seem strong, rational, or fiercely independent are actually carrying a wounded child inside. One who learned that emotions are unsafe, that showing pain makes you unworthy, that needing love is too risky. So, they build perfect versions of themselves, personas that function well in the world, but feel lost within. This inner disconnection comes with a price. Because the more you avoid what you feel, the more you lose touch with who you are. And the more lost you become, the harder it is to feel truly alive. That's why even in success, there can be emptiness, even when surrounded by others, a deep loneliness. Even while constantly moving, an exhaustion that never fades. Losing connection with your own core doesn't happen suddenly. It starts when your needs go unnoticed. It grows when silence becomes your norm, and it becomes fixed when you start believing that not feeling makes you strong, when really, it just keeps you hidden. Eventually, this emotional distance becomes a way of life. What started as a childhood defense becomes your personality. You begin to believe you're naturally guarded, naturally in control, naturally detached. But beneath, all that still lives the same child, the one who learned not to need and now doesn't know how to receive. Society often praises this way of living: extreme productivity, laser focus, and self-sufficiency. Traits that look admirable and get rewarded. Every time someone says, "How do you do it all?" a small part of that pain hides, but only temporarily. Jung warned that what remains unconscious becomes fate, and often, the destiny of these defenses is loneliness. The person who controls everything, avoids mistakes, and resists deep connection. They're not cold. They're scared. Scared of opening up and being hurt again. Scared of loving and not being loved back. Scared of being seen and ignored. Overthinking, emotional distance, needing to control. These are all ways to avoid past pain. But by avoiding pain, we also block love, intimacy, and connection. Eventually, what once protected you becomes your prison. Life turns into a battlefield where every emotion feels dangerous, where feeling deeply is seen as weakness, where needing someone becomes a threat. I don't need anyone. It's one of the most honest yet most misleading things someone can say. Honest, because that's what they were taught. Needing is too much. Misleading, because no human is meant to live disconnected. And the more that belief grows, the harder it becomes to break free, because the pain hides behind behaviors that seem normal, even admirable. But underneath the success, the efficiency, the performance, there's still someone who never felt truly comforted, someone who knows how to handle it all, but deep down just wants to collapse into someone's arms without having to earn it first. When that unsupported child grows up, they carry these defenses into every part of life, including relationships. What looks like choice or compatibility is often just repetition, unconscious repetition of an old emotional pattern that never healed. The father wound doesn't just affect how you see yourself. It shapes how you connect with others. It's common for people with this wound to be drawn to emotionally distant, critical, or unpredictable partners. Not because they want pain, but because pain feels familiar. Jung called it symbolic repetition compulsion. It's the pull to return to the original wound, hoping this time the outcome will change, hoping that maybe now the love will come, maybe now the gaze will linger, maybe now someone will say what the father never did. You are enough. That's why so many relationships become validation loops, not true emotional connections. They stop being about love and turn into a way to prove something. The person doesn't just want to be loved, they want to be acknowledged. They want their partner to fulfill the promise their father broke, but that need comes with pressure, insecurity, and fear, and eventually it becomes too much. No partner can heal a wound they didn't cause. The more you expect others to give what you lacked in childhood, the more disappointment grows, the more the pain repeats, and the more the relationship crumbles. What starts as a search for love becomes a pattern of self-sabotage. Need turns into demand, pain becomes control. Fear creates distance, and love, instead of being a bridge, becomes a test no one ever passes. Recognizing this cycle isn't something to feel ashamed of, it's a breakthrough. Because as long as you love from your wound, you'll keep hoping someone else will fix something only you can heal. Loving with awareness means understanding, I'm not that child anymore, and what I didn't receive, I can now give to myself. Even after gaining this clarity, those old reactions can sneak back in, because some pain doesn't live in logic, it lives in the unconscious, and in the unconscious, time doesn't move. Jung called it the father complex, a cluster of emotional responses not tied to your real father, but to the psychological imprint he left behind. This complex acts like an emotional magnet. In certain situations, it pulls you right back into childhood. Even if you're 30, 40, or 60, it's that moment when someone questions you, and suddenly you shrink, you feel small, helpless, ashamed without knowing why. Or a harmless critique sets off unexpected rage or total silence. These aren't about now, they're echoes, old emotional circuits wired long ago. The father complex hijacks the adult in you and replaces it with the child who's still seeking approval, still fearing rejection, still hurting from being ignored or controlled. The hardest part, you don't realize it's happening until after the reaction. It's like stepping into a play that was written years ago and only noticing your role once the scene explodes. A boss's tone, a partner's voice, a dominant male presence, any of these can act as triggers, and when you don't react well, you blame yourself. But it's not about failing. It's about an unconscious pattern still in control. The key is not shame, but curiosity, because the father complex doesn't need to be crushed. It needs to be recognized. When you see that you're reacting to old pain in a new situation, something in you wakes up, and with that awareness comes choice. But the father wound doesn't only shape your behavior. Sometimes the harshest damage lives inside, not in what your father said, but in the voice he left behind. That inner voice doesn't shout, it whispers, you didn't do enough, something's still missing, don't even try, you'll fail, you don't deserve peace, joy, recognition. It sounds like high standards, like ambition, like responsibility, but at its root, it's fear. Fear of failure, fear of not being worthy, fear of being rejected. Jung described this as one of the cruelest effects of the shadow. When a powerful figure like a father fails or wounds you, the child's mind can't accept that he was wrong. So, to protect the image of the father, the child turns the pain inward. If he didn't love me, something must be wrong with me. If he didn't see me, I must be invisible. If he didn't approve of me, I must be flawed. That thought repeated in silence for years, becomes belief. That belief becomes identity. You begin to live under an inner courtroom where you're the accused, the judge, and the executioner, always wrong, never enough. The cruelest part. That voice doesn't feel separate from you. It feels like you, but it's not. It's a psychic recording, so old it feels like truth. Healing that voice isn't about force. It's about replacing it gradually with something more honest. A presence inside you that accepts without demanding perfection, that guides without punishment, that supports without crushing. This presence doesn't come from others. It's born the moment you treat yourself with the care and respect you always deserved. The day you stop being your own enemy is the day you finally become the adult your inner child always needed. For women, this critical inner voice often appears as a wounded animus, the internal masculine image that Carl Jung said lives within every woman's psyche. It becomes a harsh inner authority demanding perfection, strength, control, and constant competence. It reflects a father who was distant, overly demanding, or emotionally unavailable, or perhaps the fantasy of a perfect father who was never truly present. When this happens, a woman often disconnects from her emotions, intuition, and softness, because she learns she has to be tough in order to be valued. For men, the father wound strikes at the core of their identity. The father is meant to be the first mirror of healthy masculinity, a model of balanced strength, grounded presence, and emotional courage. But when that mirror is broken or missing, the man may become divided, appearing confident on the outside, but feeling empty inside. Always afraid someone might see through the surface and discover he's not enough. Some people respond by becoming highly competitive or obsessed with control, always needing to prove themselves. Others withdraw, avoid conflict, and make themselves smaller, as if still waiting for permission to fully exist. In both situations, the real self gets buried under a mask, not one shaped by desire, but by the need to make up for what's missing. Jung explained that archetypes like the animus are not problems in themselves. They are sources of potential, but when wounded, they start working against us. Healing this wound means turning that inner authority into an ally, creating a masculine presence inside that protects rather than punishes, supports rather than dominates, and guides without overpowering. Whether you're a man or a woman, this kind of healing reshapes the core of your identity. The world no longer feels like something you must guard against. It becomes a space where you can finally live as your true self. When your inner foundation is built on absence, life turns into a constant effort to fill what was never there. Without knowing it, you begin an endless search, not just for recognition, but for that specific gaze you never received, the gaze of a father. That search can show up in every area of life: career, relationships, lifestyle. Everything becomes a quiet mission to prove your worth, your ability, your significance. It's like there's a stage in your mind, and someone is always sitting in the front row, silently judging your performance. But that someone might not even be around anymore, or maybe they never truly were, yet they continue to exist inside your mind. Jung said that as long as a complex stays unconscious, it controls your life from behind the scenes. The need to be seen becomes the engine behind every choice, even the ones that hurt you. That's how the burnout cycle begins. You never fully rest because every action carries the pressure of rewriting an old story. Even your victories lose their meaning because they aren't celebrations. They're attempts to fill the silence left by a father who never said, "I'm proud of you." And maybe the hardest truth to accept is this: no success can undo a childhood. No achievement can fix the past. No outside praise can replace the love that never came. Chasing that approval keeps you tied to a time that no longer exists. It's trying to reclaim something that was never there the way you needed it to be. But there comes a turning point, a moment where you can finally say, I don't need that approval anymore. I've grown, and now I can validate myself. That realization changes everything. The world no longer feels like a courtroom. It becomes a place for presence, not performance, for being, not proving. Healing the father wound begins with a simple yet powerful step: naming the pain. As long as you ignore it, it keeps affecting your relationships, your confidence, your decisions. Maybe until now you've avoided it, but avoidance doesn't heal, it only delays. You have to say it truthfully. It hurt. Something important was missing, and it still echoes in your life. This kind of honesty opens the door to something most people resist, feeling the anger, the grief, the sense of abandonment, not to dramatize but to free yourself. Because what you don't allow yourself to feel, you end up repeating. But healing doesn't stop at naming and feeling. The next step is transformation. And transformation doesn't mean waiting for your father to change or hoping someone else will fill the gap. It means stepping into your own role as the adult who can now take care of themselves. Jung said that at some point we must become our own parents. That means building the inner presence we lacked. A presence that is both strong and kind, one that leads without punishment. It begins when you start showing yourself respect, when you stop tolerating what harms you, and when you stop abandoning your needs. This inner father shows up in everyday moments, in the way you speak to yourself, in the boundaries you hold, in your decision to stop chasing approval. And that's why this next practice can be so powerful. It's used in therapy, family constellations, and trauma work. Writing a letter to your father. Like the letter we use to heal the mother wound, this one is written to your dad, but it's not meant to be pretty or polite. It's not for him, it's for you. Write down everything you never said. The hurt, the anger, the silence, the longing, the confusion, the disappointment. Write about the times he didn't see you, what you wished he would have said. The moments you tried to be smaller, more pleasing, just to be noticed. Don't worry about grammar or flow. Just let it all out. If you need to curse, curse. If you need to cry, cry. If you get stuck, keep going. This letter is your space to truly listen to yourself, maybe for the first time. When you're done, read it out loud. If you can, look at yourself in the mirror as you speak the words. Let them pass through you, not to relive the pain, but to release it, and then thank him for what was possible, for what wasn't, but still led you here. Finally, burn the letter. Turn the moment into a ritual. You're saying, I'm done carrying this. I'm letting go, do it, and do it fully. I speak from personal experience. I had my wounds too, especially with my dad. His absence was quiet but deeply painful. I kept moving forward, pretending, rationalizing, until the day I wrote my letter. I didn't know what would come out. I started with no plan, but as soon as I wrote the first line, everything poured out. Memories, unspoken words, forgotten moments. With them came clarity. Why I loved the way I did. Why I was so hard on myself. Why rest felt unsafe. That letter changed me. It became a doorway, not just to pain, but to freedom. So please write yours, and if you want, share it in the comments. What you express might be the spark someone else needs to begin their healing. Besides the letter, other practices can support your inner healing. One is therapeutic writing to your inner child. Picture yourself today standing in front of the child you once were. What did they need to hear but never did? Write it all down. If possible, read it aloud. This begins to shift how you see yourself from the inside. Another helpful practice is the empty chair method. Sit across from an empty Chair. Imagine your father there. Speak the words you've kept inside for years. If it feels right, respond as if you were him, not to create a back and forth, but to let the emotions flow and move through you. For deeper work, there's Jung's technique of active imagination. You directly engage with parts of your psyche, the wounded child, the father image, the critical voice. These inner dialogues can guide you into honest self-awareness. Slowly, you begin treating yourself with more care. You say, enough when it's needed. You realize that caring for yourself is both your duty and a powerful act of love. If you'd like a more structured approach, I've created a 21-day guided ebook inspired by Jung's teachings. It's filled with small, practical steps to help you reconnect with your inner self. The link is pinned in the first comment. If it speaks to you, download it and begin today. As this new presence settles within, something begins to shift, quietly but permanently. The world no longer feels like a courtroom. It becomes a space where you can finally breathe. Life, which once felt like a test, becomes a journey of expression. And for the first time, you can exist without constantly proving your worth. That's what healing the father wound truly is. It's stepping off the battlefield. It's leaving behind defense mode. It's ending the need to measure your value through someone else's eyes. Because the father wound isn't only about your father, it's about how you learn to see yourself through him. And when that reflection changes, your whole inner world starts to shift. You realize you don't need to run anymore. You don't need to be the smartest, the strongest, the most successful. You're no longer chasing an invisible goal or dodging a judgment that was never yours to begin with. You're stepping into who you truly are, without the filter of old pain. And that kind of freedom doesn't depend on applause. It brings a peace that isn't shaken by mistakes, a strength that doesn't need to become rigid. It's a strength that rises from within, from your essence. After years spent in the shadow of what was missing, Jung called this process the return to the center. It's the journey back from the wounded ego to the self, the truest part of who you are. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about letting go of the version of yourself that was built to survive and stepping into the one that's honest, whole, and real. When that happens, love is no longer a search. It becomes a natural expression. You're no longer trying to fill a gap. You love because something inside you overflows, and that overflow finally reconciles you with life. Where there was once a void, now there is presence. Where fear once ruled, trust begins to grow. Maybe you've spent your life trying to be seen, trying to get it right, trying to belong in a space that was never meant for you. But maybe, just maybe, that's starting to change. Because when you name the wound without shame, it loses its grip. And when you give yourself the love you spent a lifetime seeking in someone else's eyes, the cycle begins to break. What once felt like a desperate chase for approval can become a quiet, grounded act of self-love, not as an idea, but as a daily presence. You don't have to chase the love that never came. You can stop, breathe, and choose from this moment forward how you want to relate to yourself, to others, and to life. This isn't about forgetting what hurt. It's about giving it a new place where it no longer defines you.